Well, howdy ho there, folks. How are you doing today? Hope you're all doing absolutely peachy keen fantastic. I'm doing just peachy keen fantastic myself, and I will pass that on to you now. It is passing. You are there. It is passed. Okay, anyway. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a spirituality talk, as we normally do. Just before we get into it, though, I have leveled up a bit. I've gotten a few items. This brass shield I've given the barricade shield ability to. I've leveled up my mind a little bit. I got this slender sword leveled up and a bunch of stuff like that. And I was running through just doing things, and I turned on the insta-kill thing. What? What? Where's this guy talking to me from? Oh, on the other side. Okay, that's a little weird. But I turned on insta-kill to get through a couple of things a little quickly. Partially, I wanted to just do this shield. So I had the cheats on in the background. Only problem was then I took things to get upgraded, and it kind of broke it because I now have just like an absolute ton of these. I mean, I guess it's not the biggest thing in the world because that means we can change weapons, but that's not really the part of the point of this was to not do stuff like that. But you know, not that big of a deal, really. But yeah, so just to let you know that's going on there. And yeah, I've been enjoying the game and doing all kinds of stuff like that. Today, though, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of the world being illusion and on like different levels what that means, things like that. I've been reading some of the Mahayana teachings from various different suttas, and I've been reading just the various different suttas. Access to Insight is a great website if you just want to read some suttas. There's all kinds of stuff on there. But one of the ones I was particularly attracted to, there's just this part where the Buddha says that, you know, basically perception is illusory, and that like the world of like shapes and forms and well, the world of perception and forms is basically illusory. It's kind of interesting because that can mean different things on different levels. Because on one level, on a basic level, what that could mean is just that the perceptions of people, you know, like people, excuse me, people go through all of these different things, and they're always like, people are always thinking about like their perceptions, and they're thinking with their perceptions. And they're kind of trying to, you know, usually they're trying to form a perception of the world. And usually if someone forms a perception of the world, especially if it's a long-lasting perception of the world, they're going to tell you things like, oh, well, you know, we, like, this is the truth because I perceived it thus. And, you know, people will then, like, defend their perception, and, like, they'll be like, this is like what the world is, and this is how the world functions, and things like that. And but the Buddha is saying is that that's illusory, and that we each have our own individual perceptions, and that those influence the way we go through and do things. That's one level of the influence of perception, and the idea that these things are illusion, that like the world of perceptions and shapes is false. But then there's another level to this, where it's not just that our individual opinions on these things is false, but there's actually that the world itself is not of substance, that it is illusory in the sense that it's an illusion that we all participate in, not that it's actually, you know, just a perception thing, but that the world itself is an illusion. And that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Because if you look at it that way, then you have some questions to answer, and you have to go, well, okay, well, what is real if this is all an illusion then? And it's part of what makes it very interesting to me is the idea that, you know, basically we're all participating in this illusion, and that the illusion is here. Now, if you ask like certain Hindus, like people in Advaita Vedanta, what they would say is that the illusion here is like the world itself, and like Maya and how they interact with things, like the idea that like desires and things like that kind of influence the way we look at the world, and that the world that we see is completely illusory, and that the only real world that is out there is, you know, God, and that is the one real reality, and that all other things are just completely illusory. That's like one version of that, but it kind of depends what school you follow. Or that the only real existence is actually God, and that God is everything, and that we are actually a part of God. There's also the idea, specifically within Buddhism, of emptiness. The idea that everything is interconnected and free of its own essence. There is no such thing as an essence or a soul or anything like that in this regard. All things are interconnected, and no thing exists by itself. And no thing has like the true essence of being that thing. And I was thinking about both of these, and it's very interesting because you'll talk to people, right? And people will tell you their beliefs about like politics or spirituality or whatever. They'll tell you that like, this is what's happening, and these lousy politicians are doing whatever, or this is what is happening, and, you know, I think my priest is correct, he said this, or blah, 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 blah. And there's like all kinds of things like that, these perceptions of reality. And on one level, it begs the question, is there an actual reality underlying this, or is it simply myriad perceptions kind of bumping up against each other, and everyone trying to prove that this is true or that is true, or, you know, this is not true, etc. And it gets very interesting because you start thinking about like relativity, although I'm not really super qualified to talk about relativity. I know a little bit, and I definitely know about chaos theory, but like I think I would probably butcher it more if I just start talking about relativity. But I would genuinely recommend that people who are interested in this sort of thing, they look into things like relativity and quantum physics and try to see if they can find good layman explanations for how these various different things kind of work, and, you know, what they mean, and how... And how these things sort of... is that rot? I think it's, yeah, the scarlet rot got me there. And how these things influence our perception of reality. But all this is very interesting, but it's also kind of begs the question, well, what is real, right? Because that's kind of one of the main questions we have to ask. Because if you sit there and you tell me that everything is illusory, then what are we even measuring it against, right? Like, because if something is illusory, then is there even truly something to measure it against? And if it's an illusion, what is it an illusion to? What is actually hiding out there? What is actually hiding out there in terms of meaning and understanding that, on a basic level, someone just might not get? You know, that is an important thing to ask. And if the answer is that all of this reality that we're viewing is actually just completely illusory, and that we don't actually have anything to grasp onto, and then that's the main point, well, that sort of changes the way we handle problems and things. If it turns out that when you look deeply at all of your perceptions, they're illusory, then, you know, what real problems do you have? What is something that you truly need to pay attention to? Things like that. Do you truly need to pay attention to things, or are they simply, you know, an illusion that we bought into? And then, because if that's the case, then what we really need is to try to come to terms with the illusion, and then, you know, get away from it, right? And that's something that's very interesting to think about. because when the Buddha talks about a lot of these things, he also talks about how we shouldn't cling to views. Like, views are, in a sense, illusory. They are this thing that we can have for a given period of time, and, you know, we'll have them because of our perception of things, etc., etc. But if the truth is that there isn't a grander truth behind them, and it's simply something we've come to feel at one time or another, then we should probably not cling too hard to them. Because if you start clinging harder to them, then what happens? Well, then you have issues like you're willing to fight over these views, and these views, if they turn out to be illusory, then what's the point in fighting over them, you know? Like, that's a good question to ask yourself. If these views are all simply things that we can't really control, or are these things that are just, like, you know, kind of there, then what is the point in, you know, sticking to them and things like that? It's kind of funny to do this, like, Mongolian drive-by thing on this guy now. I think I will continue this just because it's kind of funny. Are we wasting our time holding to these views? You know, the Buddha even talks about, you know, his teachings, and, like, you know, these are things that, you know, it's like a raft. You need it to get to the other side of the river, but once you're on the other side of the river, you don't carry the raft with you. And it kind of implies that all of these different things that we're experiencing, they're not the permanent things that we think they are. They're all temporary. They are all things that, given enough time, will change and, you know, go away and things like that. And it's very important to think about, especially in terms of things like suffering. Because if you're suffering a lot, and you end up being, and it ends up the thing that's really making you suffer is all of these, like, false perceptions you have of the world, then what's the point of having the perceptions? What is the point of keeping the perceptions? What is the point of taking those perceptions seriously? And the thing that also gets very interesting is when you start meditating on concepts like this, the world starts to seem very different. You start to realize that, you know, there's so much in the world that is, you know, kind of completely open-ended, and people interpret it a billion different ways. You start to realize that there's a lot of things out there that, you know, we really kind of talk about being, like, more or less important, or we talk about them having, like, greater or lesser meaning. We talk about them being these things that are more or less important depending on, you know, like, what we believe and things like that. But if the truth is that all of these perceptions that you have are illusory and they don't actually change things in a way that you want them to, and it turns out that all of your desires and everything are for, like, kind of this meaningless purpose, then what is the point of clinging to them? What is the point of wanting, of desiring, of all these different things? And it's kind of cool because I was reading the Astravaka Gita, the Astravaka Gita, just to say that a little bit more clearly. And he talks about how the true enlightenment is not wanting anything and not holding beliefs. The true enlightenment is not, like, you know, righteousness and holiness. It is simply being content. Oh. That's kind of weird. Sorry, I'm missing there. The true measure and the true way to connect to God and the true way to be God is just simply exist. And, you know... Ah, these guys are back. Wait a minute, can I just keep doing... Well, they don't have bows, so I can just gotta keep doing this. That's interesting. Of course, once I run out of arrows here, that'll be a little bit more difficult. But these things that we're all, like, you know, kind of craving and thinking about and, you know, striving after, it's like, well, if they just cause suffering, and it turns out that even then, these are merely things that we want because of our perceptions, which are illusory, then why are we fighting over them? Why are we worried about them? Why are we, you know, clinging onto them and dwelling on them? All this kind of different stuff, right? Oh, hey, you're not supposed to take an arrow for your guy there. Out of arrows. Ouchie. Do some healing. So it's kind of interesting because it also is implying that all this world that we see around us, if it's illusory, that means that there's something that we can do to see the true world. That we can do something that will allow us to get closer to the truth and see past this illusion. Because otherwise, what's even the point of pointing out that it's an illusion? If the illusion is permanent and there's no way around it, then why even bother pointing it out? What do you gain from pointing out that the illusion you're in is just an eternal thing? And this is stuff that's important to think about. Because, okay, that means that there is at least some way for us to arrive at truth. The Buddha would, of course, argue that the best way is his teachings. You know, someone who teaches Advaita Vedanta, I feel like some of these should be hitting him more than there. Like Advaita Vedanta will probably have a little bit of a different approach to this, and they would cause you to kind of like approach things in a different light. There's also like teachings like bhakti, which does imply that there's, you know, a certain amount of illusion. Like there is the desire we have in the world, but they're implying that the desire itself is not. Oh my goodness. Oh, there it is, death. Oh man. That's kind of annoying because that was a lot of work to just get smacked dead there. But you know what I could do? Is just sort of go through and kill the guys that he summons first and then go through and kill them. But yeah. And I have found, you know, the more I've explored this and the more I've kind of gone after this, it does seem that there is definitely like a lot of illusion that can really kind of bound us to think like one way or another, and that the longer we are kind of stuck believing it, if we just kind of if we don't make sure that we have the right things to make sure that we get through it, we'll have a greater and greater problem, which is simply that we'll be forced to go with all of these kind of false things, and we have to go and look deeper into and get in there. And like what we're really looking for is like, okay, God is the one real thing. It is our desires are not necessarily false, but the things that we are like kind of limiting our desires to, like these things about you know, rather than God, we want material items and things like that. If we continue to focus on those, we'll have problems. We'll be disappointed because these things can never satisfy in the way that God satisfies. And then on top of that, what is frequently applied in things like bhakti as a method is that all of our desire, all these things that we desire and we go after, it's actually even though we don't necessarily understand it, it's actually a desire for God. Ultimately, all the desire we have and all these different things that we wish for and think about and things like that, ultimately it all goes back to ultimately our real desire here is for the divine, and it's for you know, God in all of her myriad forms to come back for us to try to focus on that. That is like the real main thing that we should be doing, you know. That is the real thing that is important for us. So when we sit there and we kind of dwell on like material possessions and things like that, what we're actually doing, whether we recognize it or not, is whether we're falling for that illusion, and that the truth is to see through that illusion and see that God is the ultimate reality. Now, of course, the Buddha was not implying this in particular. He was not necessarily implying like, oh, you should live like a bhakta or anything like that. That would be, I think, a kind of a misrepresentation of what we know about like the Buddha in the suttas. In the earliest suttas we excuse me, in the earliest suttas we have and things like that. And I don't think it's quite right to misconstrue the Buddha like that. I think the Buddha's path, of course, works, and I think that it can bring you to God, or it can at least bring you closer to the ultimate reality. Because some people definitely prefer that term over like a term like God, and I understand that. I'm not gonna sit there and be like, no, you have to understand that it is God, you fool, you silly Billy. Even if I do think that the ultimate reality is God and things like that, then I think it's still better to make sure that you keep it as open as possible and understand that, you know, different people have different perceptions. But either way, the implication that there is a greater reality behind all these things is, I think, one that's very important and something that we should consider and think about. It's also something that you can just kind of do as like a little philosophical brain type experiment if you're interested in that sort of thing. I think it's kind of worth checking out and thinking about. Oh. Let's see here. Oh, I need to change the way. Oh. I need to change the way I'm running at him to get the thing to stay. I'm like not hitting them at all. Yeah, the bow thing's getting weird. There we go, that's better. So, yeah, I think that's real important to focus on and think about. And yeah, I'll be right back. But yes, I wonder if this guy's illusion is that he thought he could win. I mean, he definitely can have, but then I circle around him and he's very slow. Anyway, the unalloyed gold needle is good to have just for a quest item. I hope that you guys enjoyed my little thoughts there on the idea of like reality being an illusion and all that fun stuff. And I hope that you all have an absolutely wonderful time. And I hope that you know that I love you and God loves you. And bye-bye, love you, bye. Have a great one.